I'm not going to talk for too long because I'd like to give you opportunity to ask questions. So I'll just speak briefly about the Shadowfell series and Ravenflight or Vo do Corvo, is that around about right? Which is the second book in the series. It feels strange for me to talk about this book as a new book because back home I have already written The Caller, which is the third and final book in the series, so I need to be sure I don't spoil the story for you. Nerin she started her journey in the first book, Shadowfell, and as an ordinary young woman, she has a big mission ahead of her and a lot to discover about her mysterious gift of calling. And as we know from the end of the first book, without wanting to spoil it for people who haven't started, she's heading out, or she needs to head out and find the Guardians, who are very powerful, almost gods. They're like archetypal nature spirits of earth, air, fire and water. And in order to use her gift wisely, Nerin has to learn the wisdom of those four things, but she's not sure that the Guardians will want to teach her, so she's got to learn how to ask correctly. And to write this book I needed to consult a lot of my friends who are either druids or Wiccans and who have a good understanding of elemental magic, of ritual practice and what the magic of those four elements might mean. So in this book there's a certain amount of that. Nerin is still accompanied by the good folk. I loved creating the good folk, who are the uncanny characters in this series, based on Scottish folklore with a lot of imagination as well. These books are not set in real history, they're not actually set in Scotland, they're set in Alban, which is very, very like Scotland, but it's an imaginary place, it's a fantastical version of Scotland. And the good folk are still there, and so is Flint, who is I guess the central male character of the series, who has all sorts of troubles of his own. And one of the themes I wanted to explore in this series, which is quite a dark and difficult theme, is it okay to perform deeds that are quite evil and violent if you are doing it in order to achieve a greater good? Because these young people are rebelling against tyranny, and in order to be rebels, and in particular to be a spy, it's necessary for Flint to do some pretty bad things. And you wonder about what will happen if they manage to win the rebellion. What will the fallout be later? How damaged will these characters be? That's a question that hangs over the story. So it's got quite a dark theme. I hope you'll enjoy this particular book. I loved writing it.
Hi. I think one of the things that I admire most about your work is that you have great knowledge of, Celt mythology, and how did you come to acquire that knowledge?
Interesting question. Not so much through research, more by the fact that although I was born in New Zealand, I was born in a very Scottish part of New Zealand that had been settled by people from Scotland, including my great-grandparents. And so I was brought up surrounded by a lot of European folklore and music, and in particular Scottish and Irish. And as from really when I was just learning to read, I loved fairy tales and myths and legends and mythology, and I guess I just read those kinds of stories all my life, and later on I read books about storytelling and books about Celtic history, and I was really very excited by that kind of story, and so that weaves its way into what I do. And that also is probably the answer to a question that nobody's asked, but I'll ask it myself, which is, why do I still write stories that are set in Europe, and particularly in Scotland and Ireland, and why don't I branch out and write something that is based on Australia, where I currently live, or New Zealand, which was the country I was brought up in? And I guess the answer to that is that I haven't finished exploring those ancestral kinds of stories and those ancestral places yet. And also that there are other writers who write Australian and New Zealand stories much better than I ever could. But interestingly, I discovered when I started to write short fiction, because I've just recently published a book called Prickle Moon, which is a collection of short stories, although some of those stories are in the same mode as my novels, there are also stories that are contemporary stories and they are set in Australia. So in a short story format, I've explored that other kind of story as well. The question was, where do I get, how do I manage to keep up the imagination to keep writing stories all the time, for those that couldn't hear? Well, I love reading, which helps, and I think that anyone who wants to be a writer needs to be an avid reader first. And I guess, excuse me, because I started fairly late as a writer, I'd read a lot of books before I came to it, so that helped. But look, the ideas for writing come from absolutely everywhere. They come not only from an interest in mythology and fairy tales and an interest in history, which I have, and not only from all the wonderful books that I've read, but they come from everyday life as well. So I think if you are the kind of person who is a writer and who is a storyteller, you're going to pick up ideas from everywhere. And so even though my stories are set in imaginary worlds sometimes and in historical periods, they're based on things like either interactions between people or characters that I observe in everyday life, or events that I read about or experience. For example, you probably don't know that one of my sons is a soldier in the Australian Army and recently spent a stint, quite a long period in Afghanistan on active service. He's a father with 2 very small children, and he missed his son's first birthday while he was away. And just in that little bit of personal biography, which I don't normally talk about, there's enough drama and heartbreak and stress and all those big emotions flowing, if you think about not only the soldier who goes away and doesn't see his children, but his wife who is left behind with 2 tiny children and has to do everything and has to cope with the constant anxiety. So, you know, that's only one example, but the world is full of all sorts of stories and all sorts of drama and pathos and heartbreak and joy, and if you're a storyteller you can weave that into any kind of story, I think.
Hi. What's the best advice you would give to someone who wants to be a writer?
Well, I think there are 3 things I'd normally say. Hope I can remember what they all are. The first one is read, as I said, and not just read, but read very widely. So I often get asked for advice by people who want to write epic fantasy or fantasy of some kind, and that's great. And sure, I would advise them to read fantasy and to read traditional stories, but also to read a wide range of both fiction and non-fiction. You read your daily paper or read blogs, read novels, read, you know, all sorts of books, because it broadens your knowledge and it also enables you to pick up what works and what doesn't work in terms of writing style and writing structure. I mean, I do suggest that people make sure that they've got the tools, as in being able to construct a good sentence and being able to put a story together in terms of its form. But reading is a very painless way of picking up good habits. Second one would be that you should keep writing all the time, even when you don't feel like it. Do something every day. You don't have to write part of your massive novel every day, but even just keeping a journal and writing a page a day or a page or 2 a day. Doesn't have to be a journal as in a diary of what you had for breakfast, but anything you think of, any thoughts, sit down and write that every day so you know you've got the discipline to do it. And the third one would be, don't try to write something that you think will make you rich and famous. In other words, don't look at the bookshop and think, right, this kind of vampire, werewolf, whatever it is, romance is selling millions, and look, there are 25 of them in the young adult section of the bookshop, so I will write one of those. By the time you've written your book and it's ready to be published, no one will be buying vampire and werewolf romance anymore. It'll be something else. So you should write the story that is the one you really, really want to tell, the story of your heart, the one you care about. Write that book. Don't write what you think someone else will want. And that's there. I think that's at least 3 points. So, yeah.
Thank you.
What writers, as a reader, what writers really entice you? And the second question is, have you ever heard of Portuguese mythology, Lusitanian mythology? Because you'll have a meeting tomorrow with Obod, right?
Yes, that's right.
And what are your thoughts about it? And if you like it, if there is any gods or goddesses that you acknowledge about our mythology.
All right, so you're going to keep me talking for about 3 hours answering that. So I'll start by talking about writers that I enjoy and writers that inspire me. What tends to happen when I get asked this question is that my mind goes completely blank. But there's one book that I absolutely love, which is a non-fiction book. It's called Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. She is a Jungian psychologist, and she's also a traditional storyteller. She comes on one side, she comes from a family of Mexican, cantadores or storytellers, and it's a book about the role of women in traditional stories, and I'll always put that book first on my list of books that have influenced me, because reading that book was an absolute turning point in my life. It examines how the very strong women of traditional stories, the witches and the wise women, became changed through retellings of traditional stories and people writing traditional stories down and changing them to suit the culture and weakening those female roles in stories. So that's a wonderful book which I loved very much. And in terms of reading fiction, I don't read a great deal of fantasy fiction. I read a lot of what you'd call general fiction, I guess, books about ordinary people, everyday people. I have always loved the Scottish writer Ian Banks, who wrote both general fiction and he wrote science fiction as Ian M. Banks, and he was a wonderful writer of characters, very, very humorous and clever and witty. And it's hard to start with anybody else. There are so many writers that I love, but in fantasy I love Joe Abercrombie, who is a British fantasy writer, the absolute opposite of me. So it's all battles and men and flawed characters, including one who's the high torturer who does terrible things to people. The great thing about Joe Abercrombie's writing is that he portrays characters superbly. So a lot of these characters are people who do violent and unpleasant deeds, but because of the clever way in which he writes the chapters, you can understand exactly what makes that person tick. You understand why they are doing what they're doing. And so they're a real... the characters are absolutely wonderful. You just have to get past the blood and guts and mayhem. Now, the other half of that question is quite hard to answer in a forum like this. I don't know very much about Portuguese mythology, so that's something I need to learn about. My background is very much more in the Celtic, in Scotland and Ireland in particular. So I'll just say that I'm very open to learn those things, and I'll hope that I'll be able to have a chat with some people tomorrow when I visit Sintra and find out more gaps in my knowledge. Yes. Now, we had about 4 or 5 hands up, and it's hard for me to work out. I'll leave it to the lady with the microphone.
Hi. I would like to know, in the book Daughter of the Forest, without trying to spoil the story, there is a very important rape scene in it. Do you feel some sort of responsibility writing about rape in fiction? Because a lot of your readers, not a lot hopefully, but some of your readers would have some profound thoughts and even experiences with it. How do you feel writing about rape?
That's a really, really good question, so thank you for answering it. I have a feeling that if I was writing that book now, I might not write that scene the way I did. I would still include the fact that happened to her. I've had a very mixed response from readers to that scene. I've had some readers who've been absolutely shocked by the scene and distressed by it and said that they wouldn't read my work again. I've had some readers who said that they have been victims of sexual abuse and that they found the scene quite powerful and disturbing, but they were glad that I had included it in the book. The responsibility, I guess, is to be as true as possible to real experience, but to tell the story in a way that's going to... I'm going to try to tell the story in a way that's going to strengthen the reader rather than be an emotional assault. And I can't tell you whether I did it successfully in that book or not. All I can say is that probably, in retrospect, I would write the scene a little differently now. It's 10 or 11 years since I wrote Daughter of the Forest, and I've had the chance to think about it. Does that answer the question at all? Yeah, okay. Maybe pass the mic to one of those other people that was waiting down the back. There's a hand right at the back there and another one over there.
Hello. My question is exactly about Portuguese mythology. I don't know if you know this. The north of Portugal and that part of Spain, north of Spain, is some Celtic traditions,
yes,
as others traditions. My first question is, would you ever consider to write a story about these places in Portugal in north with the mountains? And second, would Eilish be a part of this story if you write it? I know that she is in the north of Spain, right?
Right, for the first part, if I were going to write a book with a lot of mythology from this part of the world, I would have to do a lot of study first in order not to do it badly. So we'll have to hope that someone offers me a position as writer in residence at, a writer's centre or university somewhere in Portugal or Spain, and then I can perhaps do the research and write. It would be good to do that, but I like to do something on a really good basis of reliable knowledge and not make a fool of myself. So let's hope so. Now, who was it that you were hoping might be part of the next book? Was there a character? Yeah, I think I missed part of the question. Sorry.
The Eilish, I don't remember how
Eilish, yeah.
it's told. Eilish,
no,
right?
that's right. Yes, so
yes.
She went off to Armorica to have an adventure, and was, yes. It will depend on whether I am going to write any more of the Seven Waters characters, and that's just sort of a question. At the moment, no. But I can always be bullied into writing a novella or a short story. But I think we just have to think of her as off there having adventures, and maybe getting involved with someone who breeds pedigree horses, and she probably would never come home, I suspect.
Hi, good afternoon. I was wondering. I was wondering, how do you come with different processes to create between male characters and female characters? Do you, for example, male characters, do you try just to observe? Do you ask men or boys how to create them? Because for me, it's normally the main problem how to imagine being a woman.
Yeah, yes, that's a great question too. Well, I always worry about whether my male characters are just sort of men as seen through a woman's eyes rather than men as seen, authentically. I do have 2 adult sons, and they have a lot of friends, and when I'm in doubt about something, I will always consult them and see what they think, and I have occasionally changed things. It's everything from the emotions to the actions to just practical things like, if you want to render someone unconscious in 2 seconds without hurting them too much, how do you do it? I think there's a scene in which Phelan has to knock Anna out and put her over his shoulder and get out, and so I had expert advice, and there's a fight scene somewhere else so it helps to have a soldier in the house, and one that's good at martial arts. But I know that's not the question is more sort of the male psychology, and I do my best to get it right. I'm not sure if I always get it right. I read quite a lot of books about particularly books about war and fighting and what it means to be a soldier and post-traumatic stress disorder, and so a certain range of characters will be covered by that kind of reading. I read those books not so much for research, but because it's a topic that interests me. So I do my best, yeah.
I was just thinking, how do you make your characters so natural? the dialogues are something that they just are so fluent, and there's nothing that I think, at least, is something that's really made up, and it doesn't seem really plausible, even given the circumstances.
Oh, that's very kind of you to say so. I'm delighted. Well, that's tricky, isn't it? I think that I hope that I have a knack of getting inside my characters' heads. So if I were asked at any point what is such and such a character thinking, I would always know what they were thinking and where they were going, and that might be one way of making dialogue seem authentic. Even minor characters, I know a lot more about them than I ever put down on the page, so they feel real to me. Maybe part of it too is that I've had a lot of background in music and singing, and I like to think about the rhythm of a line, and I like to be able to read aloud and have it sound natural, and that might help the dialogue. Perhaps it helps the dialogue to flow. I hope so. Microphone coming down.
Hi, good evening.
Hello.
I was wondering what was the most difficult book that you wrote, and why?
I probably don't always answer this the same way. It'll depend on what kind of mood I'm in. It's tricky. Probably Seer of Seven Waters, which is the book that I'm least happy with out of all of them, and just for practical reasons, because I'd been ill, and I wrote quite a lot of it while I was having cancer treatment in 2009. I made myself keep on writing because that made me feel better to think I was still working. I ended up throwing away most of what I'd written during that 6 months and wrote it in a hurry after that. Enjoyed the process, but I felt under pressure and I felt a little bit dissatisfied with what I was doing. So I guess I'd probably say that one. But, that each book has its own set of difficulties and it has its own rewards. So it's hard to say that, that one was harder than others.
Thank you.
There's a couple of people down here.
Hello. You said before that you weren't considering another Seven Waters book, but what about the Bride Chronics? Because it left it a bit open with their early story, so perhaps in there.
Yes, there was certainly scope for another one of the Bride Chronicles, and I have somewhere at home in the depths, I've got it all, the story all worked out. It's a matter of what publishers want to do more than what I want to do. That I changed publishers after the Bride Chronicles, and that was it's purely a business decision that, I won't go into it, but it's about money and publishers and all that sort of thing. And I'm now published in America by Penguin, and those books were published by Tor. And I think it would be very difficult to persuade Penguin to take something that was a follow-up to an earlier series. So when I finally am not getting contracts from major publishers, I might write that book and self-publish, and then you can all read it. Yeah.
Hello, Juliet.
Hi.
I would like to ask you, why do you choose for the main characters girls with 16 and 17? Why?
Because most of my books are set in real historical periods, and in the historical periods they're set in, mostly the early medieval era, at the age of 13 or 14, the women would be marrying and having their children. The men would be going off to war, or they would be supporting a family by plying some sort of craft as a smith or a thatcher or a fisherman or whatever. So you were grown up at the age of 13 in that age. And so if I were to make the central character, female character, 20 or 25, she'd be considered one of the older women of the community then. She'd already have, 8 or 9 children, or if she hadn't died in childbirth, and she would not be going off to have adventures. So that's why. Now, having said that, I answered that same question. I've had the answer already for that because I've been asked it before. I understand that sort of makes it seem as if my books are intended for a teenage readership. Yeah, okay, so then the next part of that is that in my new series called Black Thorn and Grimm, which is the one that's going to come after Shadowfell, I've got 2 older protagonists. They're both over 30, so you can look forward to that. There are some young characters as well, just to keep the younger readers happy. But in the whole of the Black Thorn and Grimm series, we have 2 characters, Black Thorn and Grimm, and they're both sort of relatively mature age. I didn't think I could get away with having a 65-year-old central character, but 30 plus is okay. So they would be, again, it is set in the same sort of period, so they would be considered to be quite mature.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. I would like to ask if there are any plans to make a movie of your books.
Not at present. My agent is always looking out for anyone that's interested in purchasing the film rights. It's not something we can do ourselves because it requires lots and lots and lots of money, and B, it requires someone with the expertise to actually do it. If we had an offer from a really good director, we would certainly accept. I'd hate to see any of my books made into a bad movie. I have seen some other historical fantasy books made into not particularly strong movies or miniseries, and they can be quite disappointing for people that love the book. So I still have my fingers crossed that it might happen one day.
Hello, Juliet. I have to ask, I forgot about it yesterday. Which one was your absolutely favorite book to write?
Yes, I can't remember what I said yesterday. I'll probably say something different now. There are different books that I love for different reasons. Some of them I like because I know that I did something fairly clever with the plotting and the structure. Some of them I like because I fell in love with a particular character. Very hard to say. It's not Daughter of the Forest. I understand why people love that book, but it's not my favourite. I'm very fond of Son of the Shadows. That's because I love the characters. I like Wildwood Dancing because it was one of those books where I did a lot of work on the structure, making 3 different kinds of stories fit together, and it worked out really well, and I felt gave myself a pat on the head for cleverness. And and the other thing is that an answer I sometimes give to that question is that I usually love the book I'm currently working on best of all because it's fresh and new and exciting, and I guess that's that. I mean, I love the Shadowfell series too because I love the Good Folk, but at the moment I'm writing Black Thorn and Grimm Book 1. Its new title is Dreamer's Pool, and I'm enjoying that very much. So I guess that's the current favourite, and those are definitely the current favourite characters.
Hi, I know they have a deep knowledge about Scotland's mythology and Ireland, but I would like to know how deep did you have to go on that knowledge when you wrote Zero of Seven Waters? Because for me, from all of the Seven Waters book, it was the one who was most connected deeply with the magic and fantasy. How much did you have to go deep in your knowledge to do that?
Well, I think that as a creative artist, particularly if you're going to use existing mythology, you have to know it very well in order to then change it to fit your own book. So I think what tends to happen is that I read a lot of the mythology, and for that book, which had the sea monster, the sea mythology, I had read lots and lots of Selkie stories and sea monster stories, and not just Scottish and Nordic ones, but stories from everywhere. And what I will tend to do is read a great deal and then create my own version of what existed. So I seldom take something directly from mythology and use it exactly the way it appears in a traditional story. I usually let all that information percolate in my brain, if you like, and then invent my own. Certainly that happens with the Shadowfell series, where a lot of the good folk and the uncanny creatures that Nerin meets are based on creatures from Scottish mythology, like the Urisk, which is the creature that lives under the waterfall, and it calls to you, saying, you know, come, I'm lonely, come, you know, come and embrace me. And you have to close your ears and not listen, because once you, I think it's if you speak to the Urisk or if you touch the Urisk, then you've got him forever. He follows you everywhere, sort of padding after you, all needy and lonely, and it's a curse. So, you know, that's a real creature from mythology, but I change them and create them. I hope I create my own version of the traditional. So I guess the answer is yes. The more you know, the easier it is to play with what exists. Yeah.
Thank you.
I've got a few. I've got one there and a couple at the back. So.
Hi, I love your books. I would like to know which is your favorite female character.
Okay. Currently, it's Blackthorn in Blackthorn and Grimm. She's a little bit older and perhaps not wiser. She's someone who's been very damaged by bad things in her past, and she's bad, you know, traumatic events in her past. But having said that, there are a lot of the female characters who I love. I love Ailey in The Well of Shades, another character who's got a tremendous burden of abuse that she's got to work through and deal with and become strong. Yeah. So yes. And you know, they've all got their strong points. And I love Paola from Sibylle's Secret, who is again someone who's really quite like me, because I'm a bit of a scholar and I share some characteristics with her. So yeah.
Thank you.
Hi again.
No.
I just have two questions. First of all, what you earlier spoke of writing the Shadowfell series, Fighting Cancer. Was the writing therapeutical or escape from all the difficult time that you are passing through?
Can I answer that one first?
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So it wasn't Shadowfell; it was Seer of Seven Waters that I wrote while I was having cancer treatment. It was not an escape, because I couldn't really escape from just it. I think the thing with cancer is that often the treatment makes you sicker than the actual cancer, especially with breast cancer. It depends on what you've got. So I didn't feel particularly sick when I was first diagnosed, but the treatment makes you feel rotten, makes you feel ill, it makes you feel very tired, and it's hard to do creative work when you feel tired. So it was more a case of making myself do it, but during that period, what kept me positive was convincing myself that I could go on doing my normal things, or some of them. I had to, you have to accept that there are some things you can't do. So the two things that I wanted to keep doing, number one was writing, number two was looking after my dogs. I think there was one day during the 6 months when I was too sick to take the dogs for a walk. Every other day I took them for a walk, even if it was just a little shuffle down to the corner and back. So, and those are the things that make you think, yes, life goes on, it can be normal again. So writing was, it was a bit of a chore. It was a little bit difficult, but it was therapy in that it made me feel as if I was competent, still competent, as if life was, had just a hold on what was normal. Yeah.
The second question is, what can you tell us about what's coming next? Not only Blackthorn and Grimm, but anything else you're projecting?
Okay, well, I haven't really thought beyond Blackthorn and Grimm yet, because I'm not sure how long that series will be. I do have a contract for 3 books, but I see the series as being longer than 3 books. So in terms of writing future novels, I'm not going to plan beyond Blackthorn and Grimm. We'll just see. I don't like to plan, 10 years ahead. I'll probably try to write some more short fiction, perhaps novella-length short fiction, and that may be the opportunity for me to revisit the characters of some of those series that were left hanging, like the Brede series, like the Wildwood books. at present, there are no plans to go back to Seven Waters, but as I said to someone yesterday, it's a tricky one. The Blackthorn and Grimm series is set in Ireland, and it's set in a period that might be approximately the same as it might overlap with the Seven Waters books. So it would be all too easy to introduce minor characters from Seven Waters into the Blackthorn and Grimm books, because the setting it's in Dalriada, which is it starts in the south. They move up to Dalriada, which is the part of Ireland that is opposite Scotland, so the northeastern coast, and we know that certain people live on an island off the northeastern coast of Ireland and could probably be popping down to the kingdom to visit. So, it would be feasible for the odd druid or warrior to wander through the Blackthorn and Grimm books. I'm not sure if I want to do that. It seems a bit like a sort of a cheap trick, so I'll think about it. I'll see how the books develop. Yeah.